Hi everyone, welcome back to Misinformation in Science and Society. Here to listen, not to judge. I'm your host Annie, and today with us we have Tom Mackey. All right, welcome. So could you please introduce yourself a little bit and what you do?
Hi, Annie. My name is Tom Mackey, and I'm professor in the Department of Arts and Media at SUNY Empire State University. And we're part of the State University of New York, which is one of the largest comprehensive public university systems in the country. And Empire State University is the online university, the innovative driver of innovation and online learning that's part of the State University of New York.
Yeah. So why did you choose this career initially?
That's a great question. There's something that was always driving me to be a teacher, an educator. Um, Early in my life, it's something I was always interested in. I'd watch my teachers and I'd say, "Wow, that's so interesting," but I wasn't really quite sure sort of what form that would take. I knew that I liked English and I liked writing, um, but it wasn't really until I went back to graduate school at the University at Albany, which is also part of the State University of New York, where I was pursuing a master's degree in English and then a PhD in English, um, that I really realized that I wanted to teach at the university level, at the college level. And I was very interested in the intersection between writing and technology. So it really worked out perfectly because at the time when I was in graduate school, the web was emerging as this creative space for innovation and creativity. So even back then, I was thinking about how I could teach with that. So I was an English major really, but I was working with people who were really theorizing what this meant and what this new space would mean in terms of reading and the book and sort of what impact would this have on sort of how we communicate. So that was really foundational to my research interests into metaliteracy, which is an idea that I've been developing with my research partner Trudi Jacobson. So that's sort of it really was through my graduate experience that I knew that I wanted to have a profession where I was a professor and a researcher at the same time, and trying to find all those interesting combinations.
Mm, yeah. So, why do you think that truth, and the correct information is so important in our life, and why do you think misinformation is such a big issue?
And first, let me say congratulations to you, Annie, for having this space, for having a YouTube channel that really addresses this essential issue. I think this is such an important question. And the work that you're doing to really bring in different perspectives is really impressive. So congratulations to you for having this forum. So in answer to your question, really truth is essential to everything that we do. It's core to a democratic society. This idea that we agree on sort of what is truth and what is not truth, and that there's some foundations from which we build. And of course, we want different perspectives, and we want to sort of challenge all these different views. We really want diverse viewpoints so that everyone can be at the table and sort of discuss sort of the society and where we're going. So having that focus on truth is really critically important. And we've seen over, I mean, this idea of disinformation and misinformation, as you know, has been around, for decades, maybe centuries. But we've seen over the last few years, unfortunately, the impact on society and on people when truth is not agreed upon related to a public health crisis like COVID-19, or the outcome of elections, when election denialism really has an impact on how people think about our democratic institutions. So this idea of better understanding misinformation is really key. And as you know, there's a distinction between disinformation and misinformation, because disinformation is really when there's an intent to do harm, and misinformation is really mistakes and people sharing information they may not even realize is not accurate. Both can be damaging, but it's really those two forms that we really need to look at closely. One other thing I'll say about this too is that why truth is so important is that, as an educator, truth is also key to what we do in the academy. This idea of scientific reason, this idea of thinking about where we're going and how we make discoveries and how we move into the future. It's really key to science. It's also key to the arts, because artists are really, you go into a museum and look at an artwork, artists are really trying to get at some kind of truth, and they all do it in innovative, interesting ways. And writers do the same thing. When you're reading a book, that author is trying to get at some kind of truth. So that's another reason why truth is so important. And then I think there's another level too, that on a personal level, I was taught to always tell the truth. So it's a part of a value system, I think, that we have. So when we see that truth is intentionally, turned into untruth and lies, it can be something that just doesn't align with how we think about the world. So those are just a few examples of why I think truth is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what do you think like the worst type of misinformation would be? Like about what?
I think this is where that definition between the differences between disinformation and misinformation are really key, because I do think that disinformation is most damaging because it's intended to do harm.
Mm-hmm.
We saw that with the COVID-19. There was clearly a lot of misinformation. People were, believing different things that they were seeing online, but there was also a definite push to put out there information that was incorrect. So I think that, first of all, disinformation is in many ways worse than misinformation. But in answer to your question again, I think the forms of misinformation that are the most damaging are the ones that have an impact on public health, that have an impact on democracy, that have an impact on sort of the institutions that we all sort of value in a society.
Mm-hmm.
I think that misinformation can certainly have an impact on all of those aspects.
Yeah. So, how do like uh people like in your field try to like tackle, avoid misinformation?
That's a great question. As an educator, I'm still forever an optimist. I think that we can tackle these issues through education. I think that as people become more aware of the overall issues, the kinds of ecosystem that we're in now with social media, I think that there's a better understanding of how misinformation sort of circulates in these environments, that will help. And I think that can only really happen through education. So my research interest, the idea that I've been developing over the last several years, is this idea of meta-literacy. And the idea of a meta-literacy is that it's this kind of like overarching literacy that prepares individuals to be sort of better consumers in these kinds of environments, but most specifically to be effective producers of content. And Annie, in many ways, you're doing that because you're producing sort of this YouTube channel by interacting with experts. So you're very much a meta-literate learner. You're very much a learner as producer. So from my perspective, so that's been sort of my contribution working with Trudi Jacobson and other people within the SUNY system to really help get these ideas out there. So I think that education is key. And the more people we can bring to the table, the more diverse perspectives we can have, the better we will be. I do think it's the meta-literacy framework is very much about the individual sort of reflecting on sort of who they are. So the meta in meta-literacy is about metacognition, which is really this focus on reflection and thinking about your own thinking. So that I think if people became more aware of sort of how they react to information, sort of how they feel about information, and if they think about the kinds of contributions they can make in these spaces, I think that will lead to a more responsible, a more ethical practice in these environments. I also think that sort of there's an individual responsibility, and there's also a responsibility of the social media company. So many ways, people work with social media. We're all on social media throughout the day, and it seems like it's free, but it's not, because these are really proprietary systems. These are commercial systems that have their own sort of ways of working. They have algorithms that sort of drive content and that respond to sort of an individual's interests. So that has an impact sort of on these kinds of issues. So again, education to me is key to better understanding these issues. And education, especially if trying to become a meta-literate learner, is really about being more reflective in these spaces, thinking responsibly, thinking in an ethical way, asking really good questions about these kinds of environments, and then ultimately thinking about what kinds of contributions can we make? How can we work with others to be collaborative in these environments? What does it mean to participate in these kinds of ecosystems? So again, more of an awareness, I think, will definitely bring understanding to these very important issues.
Yeah. Um, yeah, you covered how like big platforms can do it and also how like individuals can also contribute by like thinking more critically and being like meta literate. So I think those were all my questions about misinformation. So is there anything else you'd like to add about that?
About misinformation,
Hmm.
uh, I would encourage your anyone who's watching to sort of look into meta literacy and see how that might support them in their own sort of lifelong learning journey. I think we've created a lot of resources that are, I think, very approachable. Certainly, we've done a lot of the academic writing and published books and articles and things like that. But through our blog at metaliteracy.org, we've also created videos, interactive learning objects that people can use. We've also developed massive open online courses, so MOOCs, that people can access and even sort of take and learn about these very important issues that you're raising through your YouTube channel about misinformation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just have two more questions just for fun.
Great, great.
The first one is what inspires you in life? Like what are some of your inspirations? Like whether that's like a person, idea, book, etc.
Oh, that's a great question. Um, I think in many ways I'm always inspired by my students, and I mean the students that I mentor, and also the students who I teach in my courses. To see them engage in these concepts, it's just I know I'm in the right place, and I'm really enjoying what I'm doing. For instance, I teach a course in digital storytelling where students really are learners as producers because they're creating personal narratives sort of about their lives. And so to see students not only learn about the digital resources that you need to learn about to construct something like that, but to really think about the narrative form itself and to think about the stories they have to tell, it's always inspiring. So that, I would say, that's really what inspires me and as an educator. I think in terms of on a personal level, I was always inspired by my parents, who were just, amazing people, hardworking, and just great parents. So I was inspired by them as well. And in terms of books, I mean, so many books, but I love the book. Again, this is from an educator's point of view. I love Paulo Freire's book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Every time I return to that book, I'm inspired by the way he thinks about education, and about how it's very much what he refers to as really working in dialogue with students. So that's something I'm trying to do every day in my teaching. Mm-hmm. And sort of how can you have that sort of dialogue with them? You're not just presenting information to students, but you're really working with them through their educational journey. So those are three sort of main inspirations for me.
Yeah. And do you have any advice for people, especially teens, about like anything?
Well, I think my advice is related to focusing it on the theme here of your channel and this discussion, is to always reflect on sort of your participation in these environments, social media environments. Always ask good questions about the information that you're encountering. You really have to also ask good questions about the interface itself. All of these different social media platforms have different features that are really appealing. Some are video, some are about connecting people. But remember that most of them are really proprietary resources. So it might seem like it's free, but think about the protection of your own data, your own privacy in these spaces. I think that's important. And also, there are resources out there that are not proprietary. There are resources out there that are considered in the commons, and they're intended to be really for everyone. So, I mean, just a few examples. The Creative Commons, for instance, is a space that provides people with access to images that are openly licensed, music that is openly licensed. It's a space really where it's a community of users who want to be creative and share the content that they've developed, so that you're really thinking about what you're producing, then you're either sharing it or you're taking from it in a way that's ethical because it's openly licensed. Wikimedia Commons is also a great space for that. So information producers, that's what I encourage my students to use. If they're not creating their own original content, which is the other thing that I would recommend, is really think about your role as an information producer and what you're contributing to these spaces. And another resource that I recommend is actually Wikipedia, believe it or not. And years ago, that was seen as this resource that even educators were discouraging their students from using. But it's a really good example of an open resource that is developed by a community of users who are really committed to ethical, correct, factual information. And years ago, they did get into some trouble with content that was produced that was not accurate. But they put into place as this community a way to create content, edit that content, so that there are some rules that go along with that. So I think it's a really good example of what we can do in these kinds of spaces to work against misinformation. And then one other thing I just thought of too is there's a lot of great resources out there that like newsliteracy.org, which is an excellent resource for kind of asking questions about these kinds of concerns. Project Information Literacy has a number of excellent reports and publications, essays that are really helpful. So think about that. Think about your roles as a consumer of information and being critical, but also think about how you can contribute to this space. Because in many ways, Annie, this is like you and your generation will really be building sort of the future and what can happen here. And I have to say, I have to commend you for this is just a great way to do it. You're really exemplifying that in your own YouTube channel, and inviting again, people to come on and to talk about these issues.
Yeah, thank you for sharing the resources, for just being here, making time. Really appreciate it. Yeah.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Annie. Any other questions?
That's all I have.
Excellent. So have a great day. And again, thanks for the invitation and appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you as well.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.